Hi, good morning to all of you. Shall we start? So, good morning to all of you. So, let us start. Clear? So, today we'll continue with the regional organization and their interactions with India. Yesterday, we had discussed about several regional organizations and their interactions with India. We had discussed about Shanghai Cooperation Organization, ASEAN, SARC, then we have discussed BCIM, and at the same time Gulf Cooperation Council. Then we also began to discuss about India's interaction with G7. Then at the same time, ideally moving towards G11. Then G77 also we began to discuss. So all these are very important regional organizations, and their interactions with India has given huge importance to India in diplomatic stature, whereby the collective interest of India and other member states are being served in contemporary global politics. So we had discussed about all those organizations. Clear? Before we proceed further, anything that needs to be asked? Clear? Any question that needs to be asked before we proceed further? Okay, fine, clear. So we began to discuss about G77 yesterday, and we had discussed about the formation of G77 in the year 1967 on the sidelines of United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. Clear? This G77 organized grouping comprises of 77 developing countries of different continents, and all these countries are largely confined to the southern side of equator, and therefore it is known as South-South cooperation. It is also known as consolidation of the global south. Clear? So we had discussed about this organization. I'll just let you know for information once again. We had understanding of yeah, we discussed about G77. Clear? So yeah, look into this. Clear? So G77 comprises of all the countries in towards the southern side of equator, starting with the Far East, then Southeast Asian countries, then China, India, even Russia, clear, and then Middle East, then whole of Africa almost, then Latin American countries, and some countries in the Caribbean island also. All these countries are developing countries, and all these countries have come together in 1967 to establish a group comprising of all developing countries located toward the southern side of equator, and therefore it is a great example of South-South cooperation or consolidation of the global south. Clear? India is one of the leading member of G77, and India has been playing very important role right from the very beginning. Now, what is the most important role played by G77 on its behalf India in United Nations? Because G77 largely operates in United Nations when large meeting takes place among all the major countries of the world. Clear? The most important development is India on behalf of all these countries or 77 countries has been fighting, or rather fighting for or raising the voice of these countries, so that developed countries should try to support these countries for proper economic growth and development. These countries demand proper transfer of technology, proper support in order to develop, because all these countries realizes that most of them were under the colonial control of European powers. So all these powers should provide better possibilities of development to these countries, so that all these countries can develop as a collective unit. Clear? In fact, these countries countries led by India has also began to demand that climate change must be taken into differential aspect, because all these countries believe that all European powers developed with overconsumption of resources, and that led to environmental pollution. And when all these countries has become independent, already damage has been done. These countries cannot stop the use of resources, because obviously they have to catch up with the other countries. So the wrong which has been done by the other countries obviously cannot be paid by these countries, and obviously this country has to go with proper acceleration of economic growth with energy resources, for which they cannot be penalized by the developed countries. Clear? In order to address this common concern, clear, all the member states of these countries, they establish a group known as like-minded developing countries, or LMDC. Like-minded developing countries, all these countries are like-minded developing countries, because all of them believe that they are basically paying the price for the development of the developed world, and therefore all the developed world should follow differential aspect with these countries. So all these initiatives led by G77 has resulted into a clear north-south differences, and therefore southern countries south of equator, they have decided to consolidate themselves into proper organization or grouping. However, the biggest defect with this, that it is basically a loose unit that does not convene regularly. They don't have even a permanent headquarter also, and just because they don't have any permanent organization, they don't have proper response from all these countries. And even on environment and climatic issues, there are differential policies followed by some members within this grouping. That is why, because of differences, because a large grouping, obviously it cannot result into coordinated and concerted effort towards the promotion of the interest of like-minded developing countries. But it is an important organization functioning on the sidelines of United Nations in order to address the concern of the developing countries. Clear? Much important than this is another grouping known as G20. Now we'll come to G20 as well. Right, first of all about G77. Clear? We had written about its formation till South-South cooperation or the Global South. Clear? Right. The member countries of G77, the member countries of G77, largely led by India, and even China, has addressed the concern of the developing nations, mostly confined to the southern side of equator, clear? Right, the first major demand raised by these countries, is equitable distribution of resources. Equitable distribution of resources, at global level to ensure peace and equality, Clear? Right. Moreover, these countries has established an association known as, right in capital, known as like-minded developing countries, LMDC, known as the like-minded developing countries LMDC, 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 LMDC to 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 discuss the issue of climate change, issue of climate change. Okay, right. All these countries are of opinion. All these countries are of opinion that the developed countries resorted to overconsumption of resources, resorted to overconsumption of resources, resorted to overconsumption of resources, overconsumption of resources, resources that led to environmental degradation, that led to environmental degradation. Clear? Degradation. Right. In contemporary times, the developed countries consider the developing countries to be responsible, consider the developing countries to be responsible for environmental pollution, environmental pollution. Okay. Right. Therefore, developing countries demand, that extra support must be given to these countries, to reconcile their economic growth, with environmental considerations, with environmental considerations, environmental considerations, environmental considerations, consideration. Clear? Right. Next paragraph. Right. Even though G77 comprises of developing nations, there has been differences of opinion, among them, leading to weak international response, Okay. Right. Even on climatic issues, divergent opinion has been given, by different countries, which has prevented G77 to emerge as a united front, There's a weakness also. So G77 comprising of all developing nations. Clear? Now apart from G77, we have another important grouping at global level, which is known as G20. These days very much in news because of India, because in coming time G20 meeting is to be held in India. Clear? So coming to G20 and India diplomacy at G20. Clear? In 1999, clear? In 1999, 20 countries came together, especially the governors of or heads of the central banking institutions of 20 countries came together in order to coordinate on economic front and in order to draft coordinated action plan in order to deal with economic crisis at global level and to draft a coherent economic policy. So it is a pure economic grouping whereby this grouping is headed by the heads of central banking institutions of 20 countries, and it came into existence in 1999. The difference between G20 and G8 is clear. G8 also largely focused on economy only, but even though one major criteria of G8 is that all these countries were democratic countries. The difference between G8 and G20 is that G8 comprises only of developed nations in the world, like it's G7, clear? But G20 comprises of not only the developed nations but even the developing nations. So it has got a larger say in global politics. Clear? With establishment of G20, it resulted into regular interaction among the financial heads of different countries in order to deal with financial crisis and economic crisis at global level. How India has responded to G20 will come to G20 organization. Clear? So we'll move to the next major organization, that is G20. G20. Clear? First of all, look into this organization, G20. This is G20. Clear? Okay, G20. Look into this. Clear? So, Brazil, Argentina from South America, Canada, United States, Mexico from North America, Australia, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, China, Russia, India, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, European Union, Germany, Italy, France, and United Kingdom. Clear? So all the G8 countries are also there along with some developing countries. So it has a major weight in global politics and economy as compared to G8. So it includes the member of all the G7 along with major emerging economies of the world. So obviously it is the largest economic grouping at global level, and it is purely technical organization which is to be largely decided by the heads of central banking institutions of all these 20 countries. Clear? So very important. Right about G20. Clear? Right. In 1999, clear? 1999, the heads of the central banking institutions, the heads of the central banking institutions of 20 countries came together to promote group of 20, G20 came together to promote group of 20 with focus on global economic governance, Clear? Right. The G20 was basically formed as a group of 20 emerging market economies, 20 emerging market economies and developed countries, 20 emerging market economies and developed countries to promote regular discussion related to global economic governance, related to global economic governance, clear? Right, the first summit of G20, the first summit of G20 was convened at Berlin, Germany, was convened at Berlin, clear? Right, next paragraph, right, the major difference between G7 and G20, the major difference between G7 and G20 is that G7 only focuses on developed countries. G7 only focuses on developed countries, whereas G20 has a broader participants, has a broader participants from emerging market economies, Change paragraph. Right, the chairmanship of G20, is rotational, with one nation annually getting the chair. One nation annually getting the chair. Clear? Change paragraph, right? India is an important member. India is an important member of G20. Important member of G20. Right. Next sentence. In the 2017 summit, the G20 nations at Hamburg, Germany, Hamburg, at Hamburg, congratulated India for taking steps to make it easy, ease of doing business, to make it easy to do business in India, ease of doing business, to do business in India. Clear? Right. In this summit 2017, India forcefully argued, even though it's pure economic and agenda, India forcefully argued on issues related to terrorism. Clear? Right. India asserted that terrorism should not be allowed to be a part of G20. Terrorism should not be allowed to be a part of G20 and asked for early conclusion of the UN Convention, on international terrorism. Very important. Right. Moreover, in recent times, India's diplomacy at G20. India's diplomacy at G20 has been to pitch for, PITCH, has been to pitch for poverty eradication, has been to pitch for poverty eradication. Clear? Eradication. Change paragraph. Right. The G20 is an excellent forum. The G20 is an excellent forum for interaction between. The G20 is an excellent forum for interaction between developed and emerging market economies. Interaction between developed and emerging market economies. But India has raised some concerns. India has raised some concerns about the organization. India has raised some concern about the organization. Clear? In global, raise some concern about the organization. Clear? Right. First of all, India has highlighted that developed economies go for quantitative release of cash, quantitative injection of cash, quantitative injection of cash in their economies, that leads to volatility in capital flows, right? However, countries like India needs to control capital flows, to check volatility in economy, radical changes to check volatility in economy. Clear? Right. Next paragraph. Right. India has raised concern. That G20 is slow on promoting reforms and restructuring, of global financial institutions, World Bank, IMF, of global financial institutions to ensure contemporary reality. Clear? Right. Finally, India has highlighted the vulnerability of US dollar, the vulnerabilities of US dollar, vulnerability of US dollar, and demands diversification of global currency reserve. Diversification of global currency reserves. Reserves, clear? Change paragraph. Right. Such issues highlighted by India. Such issues highlighted by India indicates proactive role played by India. Proactive role played by India to make G20, to make G20, to make G20 a highly relevant forum, between developed economies, and emerging economies of the world, and emerging economies of the world, and emerging economies of the world, Clear? So G20, some concerns also, some important developments as well. Clear? Now, apart from G20, all these regional organizations, clear, that we had discussed. Now, let us move first to the most important global organization. Clear? So, we'll come to the most important global organization known as the United Nations Organization, and India's interaction with major specialized institutions within United Nations Organization. So, we'll come to United Nations Organization. So, India and UNO, clear? So, coming to India and United Nations Organization, clear? India and United Nations, clear? United Nations. Now, first of all, clear? We had discussed earlier also, United Nations Organization came into existence, clear, by the end of Second World War in order to maintain global peace and security, and at the same time, clear, in order to prevent any war like the Third World War in coming time, clear. And India was the original signatory of United Nations Charter at San Francisco. United Nations Organization formally came into existence on 24th of October 1945. Clear? When United Nations came into being, it was established with different specialized organs as well. We'll discuss about those organs, the most important being the Security Council, which has been given the charge to maintain peace and stability all across the world. Clear? First of all, right, introduction. Clear? Right, the United Nations Organization, purely technical means it's largely headed by financial experts. It's a specialized organization, Kriti, clear? So what do you mean by G20 as purely technical organization? Because it deals with pure economic issues, clear? Even though India has highlighted other issues, but largely it is catering to pure financial issues. That is why it knows technical organization, and that is why every country is represented by the heads of their central banking institution. In case of India, it is Governor of Reserve Bank of India. Clear? Right, the United Nations Organization was established on 24th of October 1945. 24th of October 1945, 45 to maintain global peace and security, to maintain global peace and security, maintain global peace and security, and to prevent the occurrence of, any war, like the Third World War. Third World War. Clear? Right. The principal organs of the United Nations. The principal organs of the United Nations. The principal organs of the United Nations includes, first of all, includes General Assembly, Security Council, General Assembly, Security Council, Trusteeship Council, International Court of Justice, ICJ, International Court of Justice, then Economic and Social Council, Economic and Social Council, and a permanent secretariat. 6 organs of United Nations. Clear? One among them is not in existence, that is Trusteeship Council. It came to an end in 1994. So General Assembly, Security Council, Trusteeship Council, International Court of Justice with its headquarters Hague, Netherlands, Economic and Social Council, and a permanent secretariat. Clear? Permanent secretariat. 6 councils. Right. Among these organs, the Security Council is the most powerful. The Security Council is the most powerful that has been entrusted, most powerful that has been entrusted, ENTRUSTD, that has been entrusted to maintain peace and security, to maintain peace and security, to maintain peace and security. Right here only. The Security Council resolves regional issues and conflicts. The Security Council resolves regional issues and conflict through, right in capital, through international peacekeeping force. Through international peacekeeping force. International peacekeeping force. Provided by the member countries. Provided by member countries. We'll come to that. India is one of the largest contributors of peacekeeping force. Provided by member countries. Clear? Now coming to the recent role of United Nations. Clear? Now before this, question by Vishwajit. Sir, this summit of 20, a new development seen, 20 another countries invited. What is the reason? Just to go show that other countries can also visualize what is the logic and objective of G20. Clear? So this summit of G20 in which 20 other countries are invited to show that G20 is a relevant organization which is trying to create a regular platform between the developed and emerging market economies, so that other 20 other countries of the world should realize that the G20 is working towards the economic growth and reconciliation all across the world. This is the logic of inviting 20 other countries to give larger big message to global community by G20 summit. Clear, Vishwajit? Okay, now coming to the major development. Clear? Now here we need to understand a very important concept, and that concept is of preventive diplomacy, also known as responsibility to protect. Clear? So now we'll understand a very important concept which is being followed by United Nations. This concept is related to or is known as preventive diplomacy. Clear. This is also known as responsibility to protect. Responsibility to protect, also known as R2P. Responsibility to protect. Preventive diplomacy. Clear? Now, what do you mean by this concept? This concept is that United Nations believe that it needs to pursue preventive diplomacy as a cure, as a preventive mechanism before any crisis actually occurs. Clear? So United Nations in recent times has advocated a concept of preventive diplomacy. Do understand, it's very important. Advocated the concept of preventive diplomacy, whereby it wants to prevent the occurrence of any crisis before it actually happens. And why this has been advocated in recent times? Clear? Because after Second World War till the beginning of 21st century, several crises took place in the world, like the Korean crisis, then the Greek crisis, Vietnam War, Cuban Missile Crisis, Kashmir issue, Arab-Israel War. Several conflicts took place. Clear? In all these conflicts already took place, then United Nations entered. Clear? Meaning thereby United Nations began to be considered more as a firefighting agency rather than fire preventive agency. Clear? So in the era of Cold War, clear, United Nations began to be termed as a firefighting agency, rather than fire preventive agency. Clear? So global community wanted United Nations to emerge as fire preventive agency rather than fire fighting agency. Clear? And in order to emerge as a fire preventive agency, clear, United Nations advocated preventive diplomacy, whereby by anticipating some major crisis, United Nations wants to intervene and therefore wants to resolve the crisis before it actually takes place. This concept is known as preventive diplomacy, which is applied through the concept of responsibility to protect. United Nations take the responsibility of protecting the global community from any major crisis, and this is to be done through preventive measures or preventive diplomacy. Clear? But at the same time, even though when this preventive diplomacy has been followed, has been pursued by United Nations, it is also criticized by global community. Large number of experts are opinion that such kind of preventive diplomacy has given unrestricted power to the United Nations to interfere into the internal affairs of any countries or bilateral affairs of two countries, and therefore it affects the autonomy and sovereignty of that country. So several countries believe that preventive diplomacy is nothing but an unrestricted power given to United Nations to interfere into the autonomy and sovereignty of two countries or single country, and therefore it is not in consonance with the principle of global peace and security. But this has emerged to be a very important phenomenon in contemporary times, known as preventive diplomacy or responsibility to protect. Clear? And what are the major components or major elements in preventive diplomacy? Major is first to resort to prevent any occurring conflict. At the same time, United Nations wants for collective preventive actions at the same time. Clear? Moreover, United Nations always uses the technique of persuasion, negotiation and mediation to resolve this conflict. Clear? United Nations believes in use of non-coercive measures, not pressure measures to resolve any conflict. Clear? And at the same time, non-interference in internal affairs by United States. Clear? So all these are advocated, but ultimately in effective sense, it affects the internal autonomy and sovereignty of countries, and therefore it is considered to be against global peace and security. It's clear, first of all. Clear? Right, first, right. After the establishment of the United Nations, several regional conflicts took place. several regional conflicts took place that brought the world on verge of that brought the world on verge of global war, that brought the world on verge of global war, on verge of global war. Right? For example, the Suez Canal crisis. For example, the Suez Canal crisis, the Arab-Israel conflict, the Arab-Israel conflict, the Kashmir issue, the Kashmir issue, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Cuban Missile Crisis, etc., etc. Clear? Right? In these crises, United Nations came to picture after major devastation had been done. Clear? Right? Therefore, United Nations began to be perceived as firefighting agency, rather than fire preventive agency. Fire preventive agency. Clear? Change paragraph, right? In order to shed, SHED, in order to shed its image, as a firefighting agency, United Nations began to pursue preventive diplomacy. Also known as responsibility to protect. R2P. Responsibility to protect. Clear? Right? According to this concept, United Nations tried to resort to prevention, then curing conflicts. Clear? Conflicts. Right. It resorted to collective preventive action, marked by use of persuasion, negotiation, and mediation. Clear? Mediation. Right. Moreover, preventive diplomacy Preventive diplomacy emphasized on non-interference, emphasized on non-interference in internal affairs, non-interference in internal affairs, non-interference in internal affairs, non-interference in internal affairs, and use of non-coercive, COERCIV, use of non-coercive efforts, to terminate violence, very important, terminate violence, clear, terminate violence, change pattern, right? However, several experts believe that R2P, that is responsibility to protect, preventive diplomacy, several experts believe that R2P is a code, COD. R2P is a code that gives the international community, unrestricted powers, that leads to interference in the internal affairs, of nation states, Properly clear? Proper states. It's clear. So R2P or preventive diplomacy. There's a criticism also, but at the same time, it's quite valid also, because rather than acting as curing agent, it should be act as preventive agency. Clear? Basically, largely when states do fail and they cannot protect the interest of people, obviously United Nations needs to intervene, and after intervening into that, United Nations can resolve major issues. So if a state has failed altogether, if there's a crisis which cannot be resolved by the state, obviously United Nations cannot keep itself aloof in the name of non-interference in internal affairs. United Nations will have to take the responsibility to ensure the betterment and safety of the people, even if the domestic states has failed to protect their rights. Clear? So preventive diplomacy or responsibility to protect. Clear? Now coming to principles of India's preventive diplomacy and support. Clear? Right, next paragraph. India has supported the principle of preventive diplomacy, because failed or fragile states needing assistance, weak states needing assistance, clear, can be held by international community, clear, community, right? Beside, India supports the doctrine of humanitarian intervention, humanitarian intervention if a state fails, if a state fails to protect the interest of its people, to protect the interest of its people, to protect the interest of its people, protect the interest of its people, interest of its people, people, clear? People, okay, people, right? Right. However, India is also apprehensive. India is also apprehensive of Western interference, like W in capital, of Western interference in global South. Clear? Western interference in global South, that may affect cooperation between North and South, developed and developing nations, that may affect cooperation between North and South. North and South. So it's a very important concern that needs to be understood with respect to United Nations in contemporary times. Now it is no more known as firefighting agency. Now it's being termed as fire preventive agency because of responsibility to protect or preventive diplomacy. Now with respect to United Nations India, the most important concern in contemporary times is India's demand for reform and restructuring of the United Nations so as to get a permanent membership in the Security Council. So welcome to this greatest diplomatic aspiration of India in contemporary times. Before this, so what is the difference between nation state and nation state? Subrata, clear? See, understand these concepts. Clear? Concepts are, first of all, nation. The first term that has been used is nation. Clear? Second state term that has been used is state. Clear? Third term that has been used is nation state. Nation state. Nation state. Clear? So nation state and nation state. Clear? First of all, I'll let you know. Clear? First of all, when we use the term nation, nation means that any political entity having a defined political boundary and the residents of that territory having a sense of belongingness. Clear? So obviously nation is a term which has a larger significance, whereby the people within the defined political boundary, even though they may be divided individually into smaller components, if they have a sense of belongingness to that common entity, it is known as nation. Clear? So obviously, clear, nation state. Nation is basically the large territory whereby the people may be divided into smaller pockets, but all these people belonging to this defined political boundary have a sense of belongingness to the country, and therefore if this is there, it is known as nation. Clear? Within nation, there can be smaller components. All those smaller components within the nation are known as state. Clear? So state is relatively a shorter version of the nation. Here also people have a sense of belongingness, but they are not able to think beyond the defined smaller political boundary, and therefore it is known as state. Clear? So obviously smaller units that may be there within this large area, these smaller units can be termed as state. Clear? These are states. When we use the term nation state, it means when all these states began to get integrated properly. Clear? So when all these states get integrated properly with each other, it results into proper cohesion, and this entity thereafter is not known as nation or state, but nation state. Clear? So nation is one entity whereby people belonging to that has a sense of belongingness to that region, but at the same time it may be divided into smaller states, and states may not have the thinking beyond them. But when states crosses the regional boundaries and get connected with the larger boundary, that is nation, then this component is known as the nation state. Is the concept clear, Subrata? Please revert back. Next is, sir, could you please explain difference between neutrality and non-alignment? I'm unable to differentiate. Clear? See, I'll let you know. Some books will find neutrality also associated with non-alignment, but it was not in real sense neutrality. Difference is, when you are neutral, when any country is neutral, means the country will not have any relationship with any power, any country. Clear? So neutrality means you are having your own introvert policy. Introvert. Neutrality is basically having introvert approach in foreign policy, country not having relationship with any country. Clear? Be it so, even the peaceful country also, but neutrality toward that also. Non-alignment was not about neutrality in real sense. Non-alignment was that it will maintain certain distance from the two power blocks. Clear? But individual power blocks means group of countries collectively, but individually India can maintain relationship on bilateral front. So if it could happen neutrality, India could not have established relationship with any country. But it was not neutrality. It was non-alignment, that is principal distance from blocks, not from the individual countries. Clear? So non-alignment authorized the country to have bilateral relationship, but not to have direct interaction with the bloc politics. This is the difference between neutrality and non-alignment. Is it clear, Somali? Sir, is not sometimes nation called states? Obviously, nation can be called states. Clear? If all these political boundaries get in within that gets eliminated, and therefore all the people believe that they are belong to this, it can be termed a state also. Clear? So it can be termed a state, but having sense of belonging. Here also, when it is state, people have sense of belongingness. Clear? But nation is a modern term. Nation is a modern term, which means that not only smaller areas, they should think beyond the regional boundaries toward larger boundaries. That is known as nation. Clear? So nation is the larger version of states, but nation can also become as states altogether. And if the states eliminates their boundary differences and comes to believe that they belong to common nation, it can be termed as nation state. Clear, Bishwajit? So nations can be called states also. Is clear? Now, coming to India's greatest diplomatic aspiration, that is to gain a permanent membership in United Nations Security Council. Clear? Just understand first of all. Clear? United Nations was established just after the end of Second World War, and we had discussed that Security Council was established as the most powerful organ of the United Nations. Clear? Initially, Security Council had 4 permanent members and 10 non-permanent members. Those 4 permanent members were the victorious powers of the Second World War. Those victorious powers were United States, United Kingdom, Britain and France. Clear? In the course of time, one another country was added as a permanent member. That country was China in 1972. Clear? Thereafter, China also became a permanent member, having 5 permanent membership. Clear? This was there, but obviously from the beginning of 21st century, clear, it was realized by some countries like India that this membership structure of United Security Council does not reflect the contemporary realities of world politics. Some countries has emerged to be very prominent countries. They are very responsible. They have democratic credential, and therefore, clear, these countries should also be included as permanent members in United Nations Security Council. This demand was raised by India along with 3 other countries, that is Germany, Japan and Brazil. That is why all these countries formed a group known as G4 or Group of 4. So Group of 4 comprised of India, Japan, Germany and Brazil, and all of them have a one converging interest. They demand the reform and restructuring of Security Council and a permanent membership. Japan in fact has a great stake involved. Japan is the second largest contributor of fund after United States in United Nations. So Japan has a logic or rather relevant claim to permanent membership. After Japan, the third contributor is none other than Germany. So Germany also has a huge stake. India has long been a democratic country and India has not contributed financially, but the largest peacekeeping force provided to Security Council has been from India since the beginning. So obviously India has a larger claim to become a permanent member. Brazil is a responsible and proactive country from South American region, and Brazil also has a a rightful claim to become a permanent member. So obviously all these countries has formed G4 and India is demanding permanent membership in United Nations Security Council. Clear? This is one thing. And what are the other factors highlighted by India to get a permanent membership? We'll come to that as well. Clear? Right. India India and its diplomacy. India and its diplomacy at the UN. India and its diplomacy at the UN. Clear? Right. In contemporary global politics. Contemporary global politics, the greatest diplomatic aspiration of India, is to get permanent membership in the Security Council. Clear? Change paragraph. Right. When United Nations was established, in 1945, Security Council had 4 permanent members. Security Council had 4 permanent members and 10 non-permanent members. 10 non-permanent members. Right, all these, these permanent members were the victorious powers. These permanent members were the victorious powers of the Second World War. And were provided with absolute veto power. Every country having absolute veto power. Provided with absolute veto power. Okay? Right. In course of time, China was included. Included as the 5th permanent member. Of the Security Council. 5th permanent member of the Security Council. Okay? Change paragraph. Right. By the end of the 20th century. 4 major countries of the world. India, Japan, Germany, and Brazil. India, Japan, Germany, and Brazil. Brazil began to claim. Germany and Japan and Brazil began to claim that of the Security Council membership of the Security Council does not reflect membership of the Security Council does not reflect the contemporary realities, does not reflect the contemporary realities. Okay, realities, right? These four countries together came to be known as Group of Four or G4. Together came to be known as Group of Four or G4. Group of Four or G4 that demanded proper reform and restructuring, proper reform and restructuring of the United Nations Security Council. Of the United Nations Security Council. So India has been appointed as non-permanent member several times. India wants permanent membership in Security Council with veto power. Security Council. Clear? Change paragraph. Right. India has raised the demand to become a permanent member. Raise the demand to become a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. Permanent member of the United Nations Security Council due to major reasons. These reasons are important. You have to write due to major reasons. Write point wise. Number one, due to major reasons. Number one, India is underrepresented. India is underrepresented in the United Nations Security Council. India is underrepresented in the United Nations Security Council. United Nations Security Council as it is the world's largest democracy, as it is the world's largest democracy, and house to 1/5 of the total world population, and house to 1/5 of the total population. Okay, population. That's second. Okay, India has been one of the largest contributor. India has been one of the largest contributor to United Nations Peacekeeping Force. Largest contributor to United Nations Peacekeeping Force. United Nations Peacekeeping Force. Peacekeeping Force. Clear? Peacekeeping Force. Clear? Right. Peacekeeping Force. Third. Right. India being an original signatory of the United Nations. India being the original signatory of the United Nations nation should be given veto power, that can be only with permanent membership, should be given veto power to be a part of global decision making, to be a part of global decision making. Clear? Right. Finally, next point. Finally, clear? Finally, the membership to India, the membership to India, the membership of India will give a message, that international community, that international community has given recognition to new world order, recognition to new world order. Clear? So this is one thing. So India's interaction diplomacy at the UN. Clear? Moreover, clear? Another very important issue in which India has been following its diplomacy in United Nations is the climate change. And we had already discussed, clear? With respect to climate change, India and other countries has been highlighting that the Western powers, developed nations had overconsumed the natural resources that led to huge emissions of greenhouse gases leading to climate change. So developing countries cannot stop this process as of now because they have emerged from colonial rule, and obviously therefore some major mechanism and support should be given to developing countries so that they can reconcile environmental consideration with the pace of economic growth. So they cannot halt the process of economic growth because on the demand of developed nations, because developed nations has really contributed towards environmental degradation. We had discussed this as well. Clear? In course of time, United Nations played a very relevant role, and United Nations established an organization known as United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Clear? This United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was established in 1992 during the Earth Summit at Rio. Clear? So Earth Summit at Rio was held whereby UNFCCC came to existence. Clear? And thereafter Conference of Parties was formed to discuss about changing climatic conditions all across the world. Clear? India has adopted its own diplomatic stand related to climate change diplomacy in the United Nations. Clear? Right, next paragraph. Right, apart from India's demand for reform and restructuring, of the Security Council, India's diplomacy has been guided towards climate change, towards climate change. Clear? Like climate change. Right, next. Clear? Right, the debate of climate change. Can be traced from 1970s, decade of 1970, can be traced from 1970s, when United Nations Conference on human environment. Write all in capital. When United Nations Conference on human environment was held in 1972 at Stockholm. 1972 at Stockholm. Clear? Right. Exactly after 20 years. Exactly after 20 years. 20 years. The world achieved consensus to establish the world established consensus to establish United Nations, right in capital. The world established consensus. The world achieved consensus to establish United Nations Framework Convention on climate change along with United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change along with intergovernmental panel on climate change, IPCC, intergovernmental panel on climate change. Our summit was held in Rio, 1990. Climate change in 1992. Right, in 1992. After 20 years, in 1992. 1992. Clear? Change paragraph. Right. India understood that climate diplomacy could affect its national interest and hence became a part of climate change negotiation. No diplomacy, directly began to participate. Climate change negotiation. Clear? Climate change negotiation. Right. India began to make it clear. That climate change due to greenhouse gas emissions, GHG, due to greenhouse gas emissions were largely caused by the developed nations. Clear? Right. At the same time, clear? At the same time, India made it clear that developing world will have to remove poverty and undertake development undertake development, 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 leading to the rise in, leading to the rise in greenhouse gas emissions. India made it clear it has to done, leading to rise in greenhouse gas emissions. Emissions. Clear? Right. Therefore, in this prevailing scenario, a legally binding target, upon the developing world, a legally binding target on the developing world could not be accepted, could not be accepted, clear? Right. India advanced, India advocated technology transfers from the Western world. India advocated technology transfer from the Western world to the global South, and an equitable solution to tackle greenhouse gas emissions. Greenhouse gas emissions. Very important. Greenhouse gas emissions. Clear? Right. Such arguments raised by India. India is the voice of the entire global South, is the voice of the entire global South, is the voice of the entire global South. Climate change negotiation, very one, clear? Now, at the same time, within United Nations, there is another body that looks into trading institutions that is known as World Trade Organization, clear? So, World Trade Organization was established in 1995 as a successor organization to GATT, clear? So, we'll discuss about India's diplomacy at World Trade Organization, clear? Right. Another major organization is the World Trade Organization, in which India again act as the voice of the developing nations, like climate change, voice of the developing nations. Clear? Right. It is the World Trade Organization. It is the World Trade Organization, WTO, World Trade Organization, which was established, on 1st of January, 1995, 1st of January 1995, as a successor organization, of GATT, General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, successor organization of GATT, Successor organization of GATT. Clear? Of GATT. Right. The objective of WTO, headquarters Geneva. The objective of WTO is to ensure rule-based, predictable, predictable and transparent trading system at global level. Clear? Global level. Right. Among several agreements, the most controversial is Agreement on Agriculture, AOA. Agreement on Agriculture, leading to dispute among developed and developing countries, leading to dispute among developed and developing countries on the issue of subsidy. We had discussed earlier also with regard to India-US, respect to subsidy. Clear? Respect to subsidy. Okay, right. India has advocated proper support. By developed nations, support of developed nations to ensure a fair competition, in international market. Fair competition in international market. Clear? Now, most important thing as of now, clear? Just understand, clear? Right, within WTO, clear? WTO, there is the dispute settlement body, DSB. There's a dispute settlement body that allows member states, to seek action against other states, in case of violation of trading rules. Clear? Trading rules. Right. If such complaints are filed, by both parties involved, it is decided by the dispute settlement body, DSB, dispute settlement body. Clear? Right. However, if the judgment of dispute settlement body is not acceptable, if the judgment of the dispute settlement body, if the judgment of the dispute settlement body is not acceptable, by any party, the verdict can be challenged. The verdict can be challenged in the appellate body, highest judicial body, in the appellate body, which is the highest judicial body, which is the highest judicial body, and its verdict is binding. So from dispute settlement body, it can go to appellate body, and its verdict is final. Clear? Right. The appellate body, very important contempt times. The appellate body comprises of 9 judges. The appellate body comprises of 9 judges. Change paragraph. Right. In 2019, in 2019, 2 American judges retired. The 2 American judges retired. And then the president of WTO, refused to appoint new judges, by asserting that the appellate body, had often overstepped its jurisdiction. Director himself claiming overstepped its jurisdiction. Clear? Right. This has brought the entire WTO. On the verge of collapse. This has brought entire WTO on the verge of collapse. And it would hurt India as almost 30 disputes are pending. 30 disputes related to India, as 30 disputes are pending related to India, in the appellate body. Clear? Right. Such developments makes it clear that alternate economic architecture needs to be created. to reduce dependency on the existing structure, to reduce dependency on existing structure. Clear? It's very important. Clear? So appellate body itself coming into question. So obviously the fate of WTO is hanging altogether. Very important contemporary development. Clear? Next there's a question, sir, in nation state there can be democracy or monarchy? Yeah. In nation state it can be both democracy or monarchy, Spandan. It can be a democratic state, nation state. It can be a monarchical nation state also. Clear? Nation state simply means people belonging to the nation have a huge sense of belonging to that political entity. Next is from Sumana, sir. If you could please give us a roadmap for international relations, like how are you going to deal with the syllabus after this topic, the parts and subparts that need to be covered amongst. I'll let you know the roadmap how you have to go with international relations. Clear? So I'll give you the roadmap also at the end, don't worry. Clear? So coming to after WTO, clear, within United Nations there are two other financial institutions which are known as twin institutions at global level, and that are integral part of global economic architecture. These are in form of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. They are known as twin institutions because they took birth at the same time and at the same venue, that is Bretton Woods, and therefore they are also known as Bretton Woods twins. Clear? And we'll come to India's interaction with both Bretton Woods twins, that is World Bank and International Monetary Fund. Clear? Right, next paragraph. Right, under the ambit of the United Nations, under the ambit of the United Nations, there are two other financial institutions. There are two other financial institutions in form of the World Bank Group, in form of the World Bank Group and the IMF, International Monetary Fund, World Bank Group or the IMF. Clear? World Bank or the IMF. Clear? Right. The World Bank was established. The World Bank was established in 1944 in form of the International Bank, in form of the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD. Clear? Right. The purpose of this bank, was to provide long-term financial assistance, to the countries devastated during the Second World War. Second World War. Clear? Right. After some time, another institution in form of international finance corporation, was established in 1956, to provide private financing to provide private financing. Clear? Right. The third financial institution, was established in form of International Development Association, International Development Association in 1960. International Development Association in 1960 to provide loans at lower rates of interest, to provide loans at lower rates of interest, to the least developed countries, LDCs, to the least developed countries, Clear? Right. Therefore, IDA is also known as the soft loan window, also known as the soft loan window of the World Bank. Soft loan window of the World Bank. Okay. Right. The fourth institution to be established, was in form of the International Center, for the settlement of investment disputes. International Center for the settlement of investment disputes, ICSID, investment disputes in 1966. Right here only. Right, 1966. The purpose of this institution is to resolve legal issues between the national governments and the investors. Clear? Right. The fifth major institution under the World Bank Group. The fifth major institution under the World Bank Group is Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, MEGA, is the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, MEGA, established in 1988, as an insurance wing of the World Bank. As an insurance wing of the World Bank. Insurance wing of the World Bank. Insurance wing of the World Bank. Change paragraph, right, clear? Right, it must be noted that India is the member of all the institutions. India is the member of all the institutions under the World Bank Group. Member of all the institutions under the World Bank Group except ICSID, except ICSID, International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes. Write the reason also. Clear? Clear? Right. Right. It is demanded by the World Bank. It is demanded by the World Bank that the verdict of ICSID should be treated as final by the member countries, should be treated as final by the member countries, which is not acceptable to India, which is not acceptable to India, as it would undermine, which is not acceptable to India, as it would undermine the importance of the apex judicial body or the Supreme Court in India. Apex judicial body or the Supreme Court in India, or the Supreme Court in India. Supreme Court in India. Clear? Change paragraph. Right. Along with IBRD, the first one to establish, along with IBRD, the International Monetary Fund, was established at Bretton Woods, and therefore they are known as Bretton Woods twin. They are known as Bretton Woods twin. Clear? Right. The objective of IMF is to provide short-term financial assistance. The objective of IMF is to provide short-term financial assistance, to rectify the balance of payment crisis. Balance of payment crisis. Clear? Right. India is the founding member of IMF. India is the founding member of IMF, and it demanded financial support in 1991 due to severe balance of payment crisis, primarily on account of the Gulf crisis. India had to import oil from other countries at higher prices. Severe balance of payment crisis due to the Gulf crisis. Clear? Due to the Gulf crisis. Clear? Gulf crisis. Right. IMF rectified the balance of payment crisis. IMF rectified the balance of payment crisis. And and thereafter India began to repay. India began to repay, and by 2000, all liabilities has been repaid by India. By 2000, all liabilities has been repaid by India. Has been repaid by India. Repaid by India. Right. In contemporary, repaid by India. Right. Next, it must be noted. It must be noted that every member state has 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 its own quota in IMF, has its own quota, QUOTA, has its own quota in IMF, and support is provided in proportion to the quota. In proportion to the quota. Clear? Quota. Right. Quota. Okay. Right. In fact, the quota reforms demanded by many countries. Quota reforms demanded by many countries has been executed in 2015. Executed in 2015. Okay. Right. India's quota share as of now is 2.6%. As of now is 2.6%. That places India 2.6%. That places India into the list of top 10 members of the IMF. Top 10 members of the IMF. Top 10 members of the IMF. Clear. So right now India is among the top 10 members of International Monetary Fund because of its quota that amounts to 2.6% of the total fund in International Monetary Fund. Clear. So what is the difference between IMF and IDB? International Monetary Fund is largely meant for rectifying the balance of payment crisis. IDB is basically a banking institution, financial assistance institution that provides loans on lower rates of interest, especially to least developed countries like African countries. Clear. So IDB is basically that provides funds on lower rates of interest, basically for developmental purposes. IMF provides funds to other countries for rectifying the balance of payment crisis. This is the difference between IMF and IDB. It's clear, Vishwajit? The difference between IMF and IDB. So IMF provides short-term financial assistance to rectify balance of payment crisis. IDB provides funds to least developed countries for socio-economic development. Is that clear, Vishwajit? IMF and IDB. Clear? IMF and IDB. Okay, fine. So after this, clear? Now we are left with two other topics to be discussed in international relations. One is India's interaction with European Union. In that context only we'll discuss about United Kingdom, largely related to Brexit. Clear? And at the same time then we'll discuss long topic, that is India's interaction with large continent, that is African continent. So we'll take African continent as a whole and we'll discuss about African continent. So now we'll take about talk about India and European Union. In that only we'll discuss about United Kingdom, and then we'll discuss India and Africa, the two topics which are to be discussed finally. Clear? So we'll take a break for 1 hour, and after 1 hour we'll start sharply at 2 o'clock and we'll start with India and European Union. Clear? Thank you.